I was actually looking at the headlines this morning and it just
Let me guess, it was a lot.
yeah, it's a lot. It really felt a bit like looking at a dashboard where all the warning lights are just blinking red.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But then the speedometer says you're doing 90,
Exactly. You've got unemployment numbers doing one thing and inflation doing another, and then you just have politicians screaming about the budget like it's a household checkbook.
which is definitely not how it works. It's disorienting. It really does feel for a lot of people like the economy is this weather system that just kind of happens to us rather than a machine that we build.
Right, exactly. It feels like we're all passengers on a bus careening down a mountain pass, and we're not entirely sure if anyone is actually in the driver's seat.
Or if they are, if they even know which pedal is the brake.
Yeah, precisely. And I think that is the perfect setup for today's deep dive, because the reality is there actually is a steering wheel.
There are pedals.
Right. The economy isn't a force of nature, it's an engineering problem. But the manual for operating it is incredibly dense.
Which is why we're digging into this text today on the mechanics of fiscal policy.
Yes, and I have to say, what struck me immediately about this reading wasn't the jargon, though there is definitely some, but the attitude.
And it's very pragmatic.
It really is. It treats the national economy less like a mysterious beast and more like a car engine that needs tuning.
It does. It strips away all the political rhetoric, all the tax the rich or cut the waste slogans, and it just looks at the raw mechanic.
It asks, when you pull this lever, what physically happens to the flow of money?
And that is our mission today. We aren't here to debate whether taxes should be high or low from a moral standpoint. We're impartially reporting on what this source material lays out. We're here to understand what the steering wheel of the economy actually controls.
But before we get to the steering wheel, though, we have to clear up a misconception that I think maybe 90% of people have. I know I've been guilty of it.
I think we all have at some point.
Right. You hear the Fed raised rates and Congress passed a budget, and it all just sort of blends into the government is doing money stuff.
It's the classic confusion between monetary policy and fiscal policy. And honestly, if you don't get the distinction, nothing else in this text makes sense.
So let's delineate that for a second. My understanding has always been that the Fed, the central bank, handles the interest rates, and that is monetary policy.
Spot on. The central bank is kind of like the oil pressure gauge and the fuel pump. Their whole job is managing the cost of money,
The cost.
right? If the economy is running too hot, they make money expensive to borrow. If it's cold, they make it cheap. But they don't really decide where the money goes.
Right, they just control the overall flow. But today we're talking about fiscal policy. This is the stuff that gets argued about in Parliament or Congress.
Exactly. Fiscal policy is the domain of the government itself. And the key distinction the author makes here is that while monetary policy manages the cost, fiscal policy manages the distribution of money.
Distribution. That sounds a bit more active.
Oh, it is much more active. It's not just tweaking a dial on interest rates from a boardroom. It's the government physically reaching into the economy, taking resources from one sector, usually the private sector, and moving them to the public sector, or vice versa.
So if the economy is a ship, the central bank cares about the ocean currents, but fiscal policy is the actual rudder.
That's the exact metaphor the text uses. The rudder of the steering wheel is in the hands of the authorities. It determines the direction of the nation.
But a steering wheel is totally useless if you don't have a way to make the car move.
Right. Which brings us to the tool X. The text lays this out pretty simply, almost deceptively so. It says the government basically has two tools, Instrument A and Instrument B,
So instrument A is revenue.
which is a polite way of saying taxes.
Right. Taxes, just how much to take from people and businesses.
Yes, but try to stop thinking of taxes as just the government paying its bills. In the context of fiscal mechanics, taxes are an extraction tool.
Okay, but isn't that just semantics? They take the money because they need to buy things.
Well, yes, but look at the effect. When the government taxes you, they are removing liquidity from the private sector. They are taking spending power directly out of your pocket.
So mechanically, taxes are a way to cool down private demand.
Exactly. It's a suction mechanism.
I see. So it's not just about filling the government's bank account. It's literally about draining the private sector's tank.
That's a great way to put it. And then you have instrument B, which is spending, expenses.
So what to spend the collected money on? Roads, schools, the military, healthcare.
Correct. And mechanically, this is the injection. This is the government pouring money back into the system.
So if I'm following the engineering logic here, you have an intake valve, which is taxes, and an output valve, which is spending.
Right.
And by adjusting the pressure on these two things, you change the speed of the engine.
That is precisely it. These aren't just accounting columns on a spreadsheet. They are the gas and brake pedals for the entire nation.
So if you tax less and spend more, you're flooding the engine with fuel.
And if you tax more and spend less, you're starving the engine to slow it down.
Which seems simple enough in theory. But the text pivots here to discuss the two modes of operation. And this is where I think the rubber really meets the road.
Because it explains why the government seems to act like it has a split personality sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not a split personality, it's a response to the environment. You don't drive the same way on an icy road as you do on a drag strip.
True.
The text identifies two distinct strategies, expansionary and contractionary.
Let's start with the fun one, expansionary. This is what we see when everything is crashing right.
Right. This is the stimulating mode. Imagine the economy is stalled. It's 2008 or it's 2020. Factories are quiet. People are hoarding cash. Unemployment is spiking.
The engine is cold and it just won't turn over.
Exactly. So you need a jump start.
You need to flood the system with energy. So looking at our toolbox, what do you actually do?
You want people to have money, so you lower taxes.
Right, you cut taxes. You leave more money in the pockets of consumers and businesses, and you just hope they spend it.
And what about the other tool?
Spending, you crank it up. You start building bridges, you send out stimulus checks, you fund new programs.
Exactly. You are pumping money in from both ends. You're taking less out with low taxes and pouring more in with high spending.
And the goal is to basically heat up demand, to get the car moving again.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
You want to create enough demand that businesses are forced to hire people to meet it. It becomes a virtuous cycle.
And there's always but in economics, this is where the text brings in those characters, Sean and Annie.
Right.
And I really appreciated this narrative device because it really grounds the theory. There's a scene where Annie basically asks the question I think everyone asks.
Which is, if this works, why don't we just do this all the time?
Yes. It's the logical question. If the government can just print money and build roads and cut taxes, why do we ever pay taxes at all? Why not just live in expansionary mode forever?
And Sean uses the car analogy to explain the downside. He talks about overheating.
The danger zone.
Exactly. If you keep your foot floored on the gas pedal, if you keep pumping money into an economy that is already running at full capacity, you don't get more speed, you get smoke.
You get inflation.
You get massive inflation. Too much money chasing too few goods.
Yeah.
Prices skyrocket. Your currency loses value. The engine melts down.
So that forces the government into the mode nobody likes, the contractionary mode.
The restraining strategy.
This is the part that always feels counterintuitive to me. I mean, I get why you stop spending, but the idea that the government needs to take money away from people to save the economy, that's a really tough sell.
It is incredibly painful politically, but mechanically it's necessary.
Right.
If the car is careening out of control, you have to take your foot off the gas. You raise taxes to suck that excess cash out of the system. You cut government spending to cool down demand.
You're essentially acting as a huge buzzkill.
You are taking away the punch bowl just as the party is getting good.
Yeah.
But the alternative is a total crash. And the text makes a really important point here about timing.
Because the mechanics are simple, gas or brake.
Right, but knowing when to press the brake is the hardest part of the job.
Yeah, because if you brake too hard, you send the economy through the windshield and into a recession.
Exactly. And if you wait too long, inflation eats everyone's savings. It's a really high-stakes balancing act.
Speaking of balancing acts, this brings us to one of the most controversial concepts in the reading, the Laffer curve.
Ah, yes, the Laffer curve. This is where politics and math get into a fistfight.
Totally. So for you listening, if you haven't seen this scribbled on a napkin somewhere, the basic idea challenges this linear assumption.
The assumption that higher taxes automatically equal more revenue.
Right. Because standard thinking is just simple math. If I tax you at 10%, I get $10. If I tax you at 20%, I get $20. Therefore, if I tax you at 99%, I get the absolute most money possible.
But the text uses Sean and Annie again to show why this falls apart in the real world. Sean presents a scenario. What happens if the tax rate is 90%?
And he says to think about the behavior, not the math, but the psychology.
Right. If you work all day and for every dollar you earn, the government takes 90 cents, are you going to pick up that extra shift?
No way, I'm going to the beach. Or I'm going to work off the books for cash.
Exactly. Incentives matter. At 90% taxation or even significantly lower than that, people just stop engaging in taxable activity. They stop investing. They stop expanding their businesses.
The economy shrinks.
It does.
So the paradox is you have a really high tax rate, but you're applying it to a shrinking pile of money. So the government actually ends up collecting less revenue than they would if taxes were lower.
That is the core insight of the Laffer curve. 0% tax means zero revenue. 100% tax implies zero revenue because nobody works. Therefore, the peak, the maximum revenue, has to be somewhere in the middle.
The golden mean, as the text calls it.
The golden mean.
Yeah.
The sweet spot where taxes are high enough to fund the government, but low enough that people are still hustling to make money.
But here is my skepticism with this concept. It sounds great in theory, and it sounds very convenient for people who want tax cuts to say, hey, if you cut my taxes, the government will actually make more money.
Right.
Does that actually happen in the real world?
That is the eternal debate.
Yeah.
The Laffer curve is real, the logic is totally sound, but nobody agrees on where the curve bends. Is the golden mean at 30%? Is it at 70%?
Right. One politician says we're already past the peak and need to cut taxes. Another says we're way down at the bottom and need to raise them.
And again, we aren't taking sides here. The text doesn't give us the answer either. It just provides the framework. It reminds us that there is a limit. You cannot simply tax your way to prosperity because eventually you kill the incentive that creates the wealth in the first place.
It's the difference between shearing a sheep and skinning it. You can shear it many times, but you can only skin it once.
That is a gruesome but very accurate analogy. Fiscal policy is about keeping the sheep alive and growing wool.
Okay, let's pivot from the intake to the output. We've talked about how taxes can backfire, but the text also discusses how spending can have this surprising upside. They call it the multiplier effect.
This is probably the most optimistic concept in macroeconomics.
Honestly, the math here initially looked like magic to me.
Yeah.
The text claims that if the government spends $1, it can result in $3 of economic growth.
Right.
That sounds like a Ponzi scheme. How does 1 equal 3?
It's not magic, it's velocity. It's about how fast money moves through the system.
Let's break down the chain reaction described in the source.
Okay. So the state decides to build a bridge. They invest $1 million. That money doesn't just disappear. It goes to a construction company, which pays it to a worker.
Step 1. The worker has a paycheck.
Now, does the worker bury that money in the backyard? No. They have a rent to pay. They need food.
Yeah.
So the worker takes that paycheck and goes to the grocery store.
Step 2. The money moves to the grocer.
Now, the grocer has empty shelves. They need to restock. So they take that money and pay a farmer or a supplier.
Step 3.
And the farmer buys a new tractor. And the tractor dealer goes to a restaurant. That single injection of money participates in transaction after transaction.
So when they say the multiplier is 3, they mean that the $1 was used in $3 worth of transactions before it settled down.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
It generated income for 3 or 4 different people. This is why the text calls it the magic of correct government spending.
But I'm catching a nuance here. You said correct spending, and earlier you asked if the worker buries the money. What happens if they actually do bury it?
That's called leakage. If the worker gets the government check and is too scared to spend it, if they stick it in a savings account or pay off an old debt, the chain breaks. The multiplier effect dies right there.
Oh, wow. So this magic really relies on confidence. It relies on people actually going out and participating in the economy.
Which is why the multiplier effect is usually strongest during a recession. When people are desperate for cash to spend on immediate needs, if you give a stimulus check to a billionaire, they save it. The multiplier is near 0.
But if you give it to someone who needs groceries, they spend it immediately.
Right, and the multiplier is high.
That is a really crucial distinction. Not all spending is created equal.
Exactly. Building a bridge that helps people get to work faster. High multiplier. Digging holes and filling them up again. Probably a lower multiplier, even if you paid people to do it.
So taking a step back, we've built this mental model of the economy. It's a machine. You've got the steering wheel fiscal policy, you've got the gas pedal of spending, and the brake pedal of taxes.
And you have the dangerous cliffs on either side. On one side, you have the inflation cliff, which is overheating the engine. On the other side, you have the recession cliff, which is stalling out.
And navigating this road requires navigating the Laffer curve, finding that tax balance, and leveraging the multiplier effect to get the most bang for your buck.
It really highlights how difficult the job is. We tend to think politicians are just incompetent, and maybe some are. But the machine they're operating is incredibly complex. The gauges are often delayed. You press the gas pedal today, but the car might not speed up for 6 months.
That lag time is terrifying. You could be pressing the gas thinking nothing is happening, so you press it harder, and then suddenly, boom, you're doing 120.
That is exactly what happens in many economic cycles. Overcorrection.
So for you listening who started this deep dive feeling like the economy is just a chaotic mess, does this make you feel better or worse?
Hopefully, it makes you feel more informed. Next time you see a headline about infrastructure bills or tax reform, don't just gloss over it. Realize that they are trying to adjust the idle speed of the engine we all live inside.
It takes the emotion out of it. It's not good versus evil. It's expansionary versus contractionary. It's mechanics.
Precisely.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought that came up when we were discussing the golden mean of taxes.
Sure. What is it?
Well, the text assumes this golden mean exists, a perfect number. But it strikes me that human beings aren't constants in an equation. We change.
We do. And that's the final provocation I'd offer. If there really is a mathematical sweet spot that maximizes wealth for everyone, why is it so impossible for us to agree on where that number actually is?
Right.
Is it because the math is hard? Or is it because fairness means something different to every single person driving the car?
The math might be perfect, but the passengers are messy.
The human variable is always the one that breaks the model.
I love that. Thank you for helping us look under the hood today. It's been a fascinating ride.
Always a pleasure to grab the wheel.
And thank you to everyone listening. Keep watching those gauges, keep asking questions, and remember, someone is steering even if the road is bumpy. We'll see you on the next deep dive.